The content of this episode may not be suitable for some audiences. Listener's discretion is advised. Welcome to the place of rest, where our aim is to give you language that helps you displace the growing confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of our times. My name is Jonathan Boyce, and it's my pleasure to bring to you today's episode. Virginia and Skylar Lewis discuss the importance of rising up and governing in every sphere of influence of our lives. We hope you enjoy today's conversation.
Skylar, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm very excited, actually, for this conversation.
Good.
Yeah.
I ran across your material. I listen very carefully, I research, and when I came across your production and your resources, I immediately contacted Jonathan, our executive producer, and said, we got to get this guy, this organization on the podcast like yesterday. And Jonathan made contact with you. We had to wait a little bit, but I'm so thankful you're here because I think you go right to the heart of the matter. And I'd like our listening audience to hear a little bit about Rise Up Kings. What inspired you as a CEO to establish this organization?
Yeah, so there's a saying, your mess becomes your message, right? And so my mess, which was my challenges with, I would say, being an immature man, which led to some of the trauma that I had experienced personally as a kid, some of the adverse experiences that I had, some of those being finding my first pornography magazine at 12 years old and struggling with lust and porn for most of my teenage years and into adulthood and not really knowing how to navigate that. Right? As a Christian, I was confused, had a lot of shame, guilt, and didn't know how to break free. And so I figured, okay, well, I guess I'm just going to have to deal with this the rest of my life. And so I had that I was struggling with, mixed with divorced parents, insecurity. And then I eventually met the woman of my dreams, Jessica, and an incredibly powerful woman, and thought I had got it all together, thought I was a confident man and secure in myself. However, my integrity, the relationship I had with my word was way off. And so I ended up committing to her while we were dating that we would be committed through, until we got married. Ended up cheating on her before we got married, really jacked up the relationship. So that caused me to dig into some deep reflection and healing work. And so as I was on my healing journey, right, learning how to be a man of my word, truly be a man of my word, and how to really manage all of life, right? Manage my family, manage my faith, my fitness, my finances and business, which was very difficult. I eventually put together some processes after failing a lot and realized that many other men struggle with some of those same things, with not healing from their past trauma and also from not knowing how to properly live a life of abundance and of impact and of integrity. There's a lot of men that I would say have very weak character, and I was one of those guys. So my message, the experience, what we do, which is pretty impactful, was designed from my own failures and the recovery from that.
Wow, what a great story. The enduring voice of this generation will speak to the triumph of the human spirit. I've been saying that for 20 years, and listening to you just reminds me that people like you, men, women, and children like you will rise up to, what did you say? The mess becomes the message.
The mess can become our message.
It can. Yeah, it does.
It does when we don't hide it.
That's right.
Right. The problem, and I'm sure you deal with this a lot with your clients, is when we hide the mess inside, it takes up energy. It starts to destroy us from the inside out. And so as we start to bring some of those things into the light, The light is very freeing. The light is truth. And so we get to experience a whole new level of freedom as we bring it into the light.
And if you don't speak your message, and our listening audience is familiar with me addressing this, if you don't speak your message, your body will. And it'll manifest in autoimmune disease and cancers and all kinds of different things. And if you think you've dodged a bullet, your children. The psychology of the parents becomes the biology of the child. 1 year prior to conception, we see that all the time. The work of Dr. Hammer, German New Medicine, the Pyramid of Health, Jabal Renault. Certainly the Chinese have been on this for many, 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 many years. And it certainly comes down to, as a man thinks in his heart, so he is. And the manifestation of this confusion, chaos, and dis-ease that you just described in your opening statement, it does have a voice. It has matter. And so if you don't flush it out, it will manifest in one way or another. Why do you think men are hurting? You have an enormous amount of experience with men, and you're at the heart of the matter. Tell me what your observations are.
Yeah, so I specifically deal with men. My wife works with women, but our primary, we really started working with men because I understand their challenges. So there's some interesting statistics. So basically, children that grow up in a fatherless household, and we don't think fatherlessness is a real issue. However, it is, and I'll explain why. So they have a 4 times greater risk of poverty if their father wasn't present, and they're 7 times more likely women are 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teen, and 85% of the youth currently in prison grew up in fatherless homes. So what's interesting is the amount of kids who were born to a household without their father in the 1940s was 4%. Only 4% of the homes were fatherless. And if we look at today's numbers, that's risen to 40% of households do not have their biological father there. And so that is a major, major issue. It's gone up tenfold. And so there's obviously something going wrong and something's off. And so what happens though is when you have that, when you don't grow up with a father in your home, you don't have that mentorship, you don't have that masculinity, you don't have that guidance, that care, that protection. It does something to a man. It does something to a woman,
both,
also to a girl. However, working with men, it confuses them on what it means to be a man. So they tend to lack integrity. They tend to have childhood trauma. They tend to have gotten stuck in addiction and addictive patterns, whether it's alcohol or pornography or drugs. And so we have a lot of unhealed men that are operating in, they've built this ego, they've built this facade, and they're living what looks like normal lives, but on the inside, they're unfulfilled and struggling emotionally in relationships because they haven't done some of the deeper work to really heal their past. And so that's a piece of the puzzle is healing. And so I consider healing such an important part of serving humanity, is helping people live free, the freedom that's available to them. And I would say most people do not live in freedom. Most people are stuck. Don't. Yeah, they're very stuck in relationships, in their marriage, physically, the way they eat. They're just very stuck. And so a lot of that comes from their past, and a lot of that comes from lack of mentorship on how to live a life of freedom and how to really manage it all, the stress, the anxiety, everything that comes with life.
I'm curious about this topic of toxic masculinity. You say it does not exist. Can you expound on that for us?
Yeah. It's easy to think it exists when you look at people like Andrew Tate. I was watching one of his videos. Are you familiar with Andrew Tate at all?
Very.
So I was watching one of his videos and it's just intense. It's intense the way he treats other people. And so I'm not to judge, but that gives a bad rep to men when we're watching this stuff. And so what happened is masculinity. Where did masculinity come from? So my belief, right, as a Christian, is masculinity came from God. So God created man. God created masculinity. And so if it's created by God, it's always good. It's not a bad thing. And so masculinity is like masculinity itself is good in its nature. And so when masculinity is bad, there's no such thing as toxic masculinity, because if it's toxic, it's not masculinity. So masculinity is my definition of masculinity is protecting the vulnerable. So that is never bad, and that can never be toxic. The moment it goes to toxic is the moment that it's no longer protecting the vulnerable.
Vulnerability is not a position of weakness either. Vulnerability has nothing to do with weakness. If anything, it has more to do with meekness, which is measures of strength under control. So I'm glad you brought that up. I agree, because I think this term is so misused and it is so destructive. I've never worked with a woman or a man where roles were healthy, productive, and life-giving. Dad, mom, in the context of a healthy, loving relationship. I've never met a man or a woman that was not content and happy. They're difficult to find nowadays because the disintegration of the family has been so consistent for the last 30, 40, for the last, honestly, 40 years now almost. It's chilling to say this, but it's been in a consistent decline. And so the toxicity of the roles, this is my accent comes out in these conversations, but it really manifests in the context of a disruption in the authority of a man in a home and the power of a woman. We have no problem understanding these things in a corporate structure, for example. We see that that a CEO, by virtue of his position, has to have authority. He has to have a vision. He's got to regulate. He's got to manage. He's got to control. He's got to govern, right? But then the power comes in the collaboration of the rest of the team, right? And the mechanism functions when power and aligns itself with authority, and authority delegates power justly, and all that is managed well, an organization will thrive and prosper, and people do not leave. They stay. It's like a highly functioning family, if you will. Mm-hmm. But when there's a breach in that, is it Simon Sinek? Really speaks about the organizational, the patterns and the rhythms of these organizations that thrive and are successful. And it very much resembles the constitution of a healthy family, where there's healthy power and authority and process that all work together, not because one is superior to the other. It's just a requirement of balance, harmony, and coherence that establishes productivity.
It's proper ordering, right? When we're out of order, we turn to disorder,
right?
And so proper ordering of a family or of an organization leads to a healthy organization or a healthy family. But when things are out of order and there's roles that are confused, and so that's what me and Jessica, my wife, have done a lot of work around this. Hey, what are our roles within the family? And so what happens is. Luckily, she's incredible. So she wants me to continue to step up into my masculine energy and my authority and my role. Well, she's learning to step in and has been learning to step in into her feminine role. So feminine by nature is more free flow. It's more trusting. It's more open. And that's why when we say vulnerable, vulnerable is a choice. Sometimes it's a choice, but many times women can choose to be hardened, or they can choose to be vulnerable, right? And so when you're vulnerable, when you're more open, there's a higher chance for risk. And so many women have been hurt by men. And so they therefore are saying, you know what? I don't think I'm going to trust men or put myself out there as much. I want to stay in control. And that's a very valid, totally valid. I would even say guys have caused a lot of this. Mm-hmm. So the problems that we have, men have really created a lot of this and caused women to say, hey, you know what? We're going to take back control because we can't trust you. We can't trust that you're going to utilize the power in a way that's truly going to serve me and the family.
I love that I'm thankful you brought up this point. I recently heard a gentleman speaking, and this specific segment of the discourse was gripping. And he talked about this specific role reversal, if you will, compromise in roles. And he says the responsibility is always that of a man. You talked about masculinity being close to the heart of God because it's life-giving, it's life-sustaining, it's a covering. And he talked about when there's a reversal in role and a compromise or a fracture in these systems and relationships or marriage or a family, it's because the head that has the authority, I'm paraphrasing it in my own language, but this is what he basically said, is compromised. Moral compromise fractures, injures leadership because there's a breach of trust. And when there's a breach of trust in a marriage, especially when there's children involved, what happens? Women feel a need immediately to step into that lioness role, that protection role, not just for her children, but even for her marriage, her home, the finances, for everything. And so they forfeit authority, I think, before it's usurped by a woman. Although the nature of a woman is always that power struggle that keeps everything, I think, accountable, right? But it's certainly in our nature. But anyway, do you have anything to say about that?
No, I think that's right on. Women, what I've seen with working with men is when they have failed, and most men have failed in some way, right? Whether it is breaking a commitment, breaking some promise, there's something that they've broken where it's caused a moral break, right? A break in trust. And so women then will start to take over. When guys aren't doing what they need to be doing with the family, women automatically step up. It's like it's built into them. And so as men are no longer leading in their family, they're busy focused on working and providing, but they're not leading at home or leading in other areas. Women feel the need to rise and to start to take over. And then they become burdened. They become hardened because feminine energy is more flow. It's more free. Masculine energy is more rigid, more focused, more driven. We have men that have taken that role, women that have taken the masculine role, and there's no longer polarity in the relationship. And there's not this passion that's available inside of them because now you have a woman that's stepping into her masculine and then a man that's trying to be in his masculine. And it's just this battle.
Right. But true masculinity comes with brokenness and humility, and exactly the path you took. He can restore this imbalance in a family and in a generation can be restored, but men are going to have to rise up, take up their authority and take the lead in this. I believe it from the depths of my heart because I don't know a woman that doesn't desire to be loved, cherished, honored, supported, nurtured. Her very anatomy bears witness of that. She brings this very specific tenderness and role to this relationship. And I don't know a man really that doesn't feel like more of a man when he honors and cherishes what's sacred about his partner and protects and shelters that. It makes him feel more of a man, and she can step into that femininity. So
well said.
Thank you for the work you're doing. Tell us a little bit about what it means to be a man in the marketplace. No easy place to thrive and succeed and maintain the balance that we just discussed.
Who I started out working with was primarily CEOs. So executives, CEOs, founders of small, mid-sized, large organizations, because I felt that if I could help that man lead better, lead himself better, heal, lead his family better, lead his business better, that the impact would be exponential because of the people that he's leading. And so that's really how we started to grow and rapidly expand as an organization. And so leading in the marketplace means that as a man of faith, what that means to me is being a servant leader, is learning to be effective in the way that I lead my team in a servant manner. So we hear the term power. And so I looked up the definition of power. So it's really interesting. It is the ability to influence others and circumstances. So other people and circumstances. So power, it gets thrown around. It's getting a bad rep. But all power is the ability to influence circumstances and people around us. So when we can start to step into power through serving other people, our influence can increase. Now there's dictatorship power where you're forcing influence. And then there's servant leadership power where you're serving them. And through that process, you're influencing the people around you and even the circumstances. So what's interesting is someone that's powerful, actually the opposite of power is impotent. So an impotent man does not have the ability to influence. A powerful man or woman has the ability to influence the people and circumstances. So that's what's really interesting is like we get the ability to influence entire circumstances in our lives. So some people think we do a lot of work around the victim nature, the victim mentality, and how that permeates a lot of our society right now. And so the victim nature in its nature doesn't have any power, but as you step into more power and realize you have more responsibility over your life, you gain power to now not have circumstances happen to you. They actually happen for you. And so it's a major life shift. And so having more men and women in the marketplace, it's actually interesting. I have we just sold our organization. We have a restoration company. We sold it last year. So Stephanie runs that organization. She's the VP of operations. So she runs the entire business. Powerful woman. And then I have another lady that runs Rise Up Kings, a men's organization, but she's just a powerhouse. Her name's Jessica Craycraft. And so I have powerful women that are running these organizations. And so as men or women in the marketplace, I think we have a responsibility to start to lead differently, because even in the marketplace, people are getting tainted by entrepreneurship and thinking that there's a dictatorship that's happening. So I think as we become more aware of how to lead properly, we will allow more healing to happen in the marketplace, allow more connection to happen in the marketplace. I believe that from the marketplace stems entrepreneurship. Capitalism is one of the best things that can happen for our country, I believe, when it's done right. And so that's why I believe having effective leadership and leaders in the marketplace is so critical, because capitalism can be the engine that drives a healthy society.
100%. Because at the root of successfully restoring healthy leadership that you just described, men must rise up and take their lawful position of authority by first and foremost self-governing their own passions, their own affections, their own brokenness, right?
Mm-hmm.
After we think deeply about the real condition of our heart, anybody with a pulse would say, I've got to make some changes. That little description I just gave, scenario I just shared, that's called repentance. After you think, turn. Of course. After we think deeply about our own lives, the consequence of our life, the impact it's happening on us and people in our spheres of influence, you noticed you were destroying your life, your family with your own hands. What you really did was stop, think, and after you did both things, you turned around. And it isn't an easy transition. It's a process. But that's where you began, from what I hear and what I see. And perhaps this is what was so appealing about your call to restore kings,
I would
leaders.
say restore the hearts of men.
Yes, right. But that's lawful authority, well manifested, well managed, well lived out in such a way that is compelling. And a woman, a child, people by nature want to come under what? Or alongside or join that kind of leadership. And you're absolutely right that a woman, by virtue of her very anatomy and her very constitution, of course she has a significant leadership role. It's no less important, it's just different.
Well, it gives space. As a man is secure and confident in himself, I would say a weak and insecure man does the most damage to society, to families. So if we can have more strong, secure men, healed men, it gives space for them to not push their wives down, not push other people down because of their own insecurities. So as I've stepped into my leadership, my security, like I want to pull my wife up. I want to support her and have her be as powerful as humanly possible without me being insecure about her power.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So, but there was times where she's a powerful lady. I remember insecurity. I remember her speaking on stage and me feeling a little bit insecure about that because she was speaking to a large crowd, and the power that she shows when she's on stage is pretty significant. And I remember feeling, and I even remember throwing a little jab at her verbally after, like a little comment. And then I had to reflect and go, why did I do that? And so it was because I had felt some insecurity in that moment. So the more we can help men become strong, become secure, it shifts everything within the family. And they no longer are suppressing other people for their own power and their own gain.
Dr. Charles Kraft, cultural anthropologist, professor of anthropology for years at UCLA, and retired, I guess finished his 30 years or so at Fuller University in Pasadena, said, Virginia, my observation at my old age looking back is that the gravest mistake we've made is to confuse value with function. A man has a function. His anatomy speaks for itself. We've been confused about that for about 40 years, but Exhibit A, the Olympics, Exhibit A, what's happening in women's sports. Mm-hmm. There's nothing equal under the sun. My right eye and my left eye aren't equal. My right ear and my left hand are not equal. They have a different function. They have a different role. By the way, their very constitution is, of course, similar, but they're not equal. There's nothing equal. That's not a just scale. The value of both is immeasurable. The function of each speaks for itself. Anatomy bears witness of what that is. And any rhetoric that brings confusion, chaos, and dis-ease, and that universal principle those universal principles I just pointed out, we need to disarm those arguments and every stronghold that rises up against embracing truth. And we need to stand up and speak up against it because it diminishes our life. The value of a man is immeasurable. The value of a woman is immeasurable. The importance of the roles of each is immeasurable, but the function of each is different and equally valuable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 100% agree.
Yeah, your work really inspires me because I have to deal with the literal molecular structure and constitution and the implications of that. And disregarding that is really afflicting our mental health as a nation. And we can't sit this one out. I think that's what keeps coming out. Mm-hmm. So thankful for your work. But tell us a little bit in closing about the 2-day CEO Rise Up Kings.
Yeah, so we have our organization is called Rise Up Kings. It's a movement of specifically for men of faith or people open to the faith, and we put on these boot camps. A man is not forged in a classroom; he's forged in war, and so like that's where he becomes the version that he's most capable of, as far as through the hard things that we go through really forge us, and so. We've created an experience, a 3-day experience, where men get an opportunity to be tested in their physical side of themselves, emotionally, intellectually, and with a community of men. What I've found is there's many men out there and women that are searching for community, that are looking for a great community to be a part of. And so high achieving guys, they don't really know where to find that community of like-minded men. And so we create the community and we do some really intense experiences physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And by the time they're done, they've had a soul level transformation. It's very hard to have a soul level transformation at a talk or maybe a lecture. It can happen. However, we do experiential learning. I'm sure you're very familiar with that. So we are all about experiential learning. So we have a series of experiences every day that they go through. And then we have group conversations afterward and processing and debriefing. And through that process of 3 days of many experiences, they walk away with a renewed fire, a passion, a hunger to be the best man that they can possibly be for their wife, for their kids, and for the people around them. And along with some healing that happens during that process.
Are there limitations, age, health?
No, we have guys that are 350 pounds, very overweight, and haven't worked out in 20 years. And then we've had multiple 75-year-old, 80-year-old guys come through that are just hanging in there. And it's basically at your own pace. So wherever we meet a man, wherever he's at.
Where do you meet? How often does this happen? And what are the registration requirements?
Yeah, so we run about 50 events a year, a lot. They're out here in Dallas. We just finished building our whole headquarters out here in Dallas, Texas. And we have events for CEOs, for non-business owners, for Gen Z. We have a passion for 18 to 26-year-olds, and then for pastors. And so we have different event series for each of those.
Is it strictly a Christian program, or is everyone welcome?
There must be open to the faith, open to Christianity. Mm-hmm. So if they're very closed off with that, no problem, but this wouldn't be the ideal experience. But if they are Christian or open to that, most of the men have an encounter with God at the experience.
I bet.
Like a legit encounter.
Anybody that deals with reality head on and is willing to face their own depravity and their own limitations is going to have an experience with God. Any truth seeker. Beautiful. This is amazing. I am so thankful for your work. Just a few second clip. I think it was prompted a little further investigation, and I was just so impressed by everything that you're doing. It's an honor to support your venture. We'll make sure we put all the information, your contact information, resources, and it'll be an honor to have you back.
Thank you, Virginia. Yeah, I love your work. From what I've seen too, I hope we get some more time to talk too. From what I've seen, you do some incredible work also. So very excited to learn more.
Well, this conversation was of specific interest to me because of the first responders program we've launched. And during the course of a conversation with a group last week, I had to say some hard things. We always say hard things. I don't say it to them. I'm saying it to us. So together we can reason and, again, dismantle a lot of confusion, chaos, and dis-ease of the age and think more clearly so that after we think, we can turn and perhaps do some things different. There's not one single person, in my opinion, that can sit this one out. So at whatever capacity you're at, whatever you have that you can give, I want you to be inspired by Skylar's message and by the work of R.E.S.T. Most of you follow us that are following our regular followers. And this isn't Skylar doing this or Virginia Dixon or R.E.S.T. or Rise Up Kings. This is the call of a generation to lock arms, I think, and have meaningful conversations about the reality that we can do so much more if we're able to step into relational, emotional, and spiritual truth. The change has to be with us. And the fruit of what Skylar did is this amazing movement. I love your word movement. Rest, recover, and live free is our movement, Skylar. But for us to do that, we need leaders to rise up, speak up, and no dream is too small and no dream is too big. The greater the problems, the greater the possibilities. They're endless. I hope this is encouraging to our listening audience. You certainly are to me.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
We hope listening to this episode has brought you closer to experiencing the freedom of wholeness and healing. If you have questions or comments about today's episode, or for updates about R.E.S.T., please visit our Instagram or Facebook at The Place of R.E.S.T. If you would like more information about Virginia, or to support and join the cause of R.E.S.T., please go to theplaceofrest.com/donate. or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to Rest with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.